So what I would like to read to you as well, it's coming from the government, right? Because I usually tell people, don't believe me, right? I can read. So I will be happy to read it to you, okay? Because that's what you all need to know, how the system works. This is directly from the government. Meeting the minimum eligibility requirements for the invitation process in no way guarantees that you will be invited. Because being invited to apply is exceptionally competitive, the vast majority of people will not receive an invitation. The government strongly suggests and encourages anyone seeking nomination to explore all other migration pathways and do not wait to be invited. Why the government is saying this? Because they know there are hundreds of thousands of people who put their hand up for one of those nominations, and the states don't have that many to give away. So in simple terms, it's a bit of a lottery, which you don't control. The states have the power to change the nomination requirements without notice, as they did in the past. Why would they do that? Because the states and territories want to use the small number of visas they can give away in the best possible way to help the state. For example, if the state is running out of teachers or nurses, they would prefer nurses and teachers compared to engineers or marketing specialists, right? Also, if the demand in that particular state is very, very big, they're going to make it harder. They will probably impose you have to be working 6 months full-time in our state in your nominated occupation, for example. The interesting fact which I discovered looking at last financial year and current financial year, then South Australia was the only state which has not really been given any extra nominations compared to the year before. For example, New South Wales now has almost 12,000 nominations available. Victoria was the biggest benefactor. They currently have 11,400. But again, we have to be very mindful of how many people in that particular state or territory are trying to obtain one of those nominations. So before you pack your bags and decide to go to Adelaide, Darwin or Perth, check few things. Check how many nominations that state has available. Number two, are jobs available in your position in that state? I had a phone call with a client 2 days ago. She was advised to go to Perth. She is a multimedia specialist. I should point out that multimedia specialist is a primary occupation and migration pathway exists anywhere in Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, as well in the bush. She was advised to go to Perth because apparently it's easier to obtain permanent residency. I just randomly look at how many companies advertise in Perth for position multimedia specialist. The answer was 0. So this person would have packed her bags, left job in Melbourne, travel across the country to Perth because someone thought it's easier to apply for permanent residency in Perth in her role. Being a primary occupation, MLTSSL, she can obtain permanent residency in the same way in Melbourne, where she's at the moment and having a job, as well as in Perth. So in her case, location makes no difference. In her case, chasing the job is going to give her the permanent visa. All the subclasses, the 189, 190 and 491 are points tested subclasses. So people need to reach the minimum required points based on the state and territory requirements, right? I often hear from students saying, but Michael, if I study in regional Australia, I get additional points, so my points will increase. The answer is yes, absolutely. You get additional points, 5. But how many students do we have in South Australia? according to the data from Department of Education, 80,000. So every of those students will get the extra 5 points. What difference would it actually make? Not much, because every student in your classroom, as long as they complete the qualification, of course, will obtain the additional 5 points. And all of those chasing the same thing. They're all chasing the same dream, which is one of those 7,000 nominations in South Australia. So those 5 points may not necessarily play any significant role because you're competing with people with the same number of points. So that was the nomination process, the 189, 190, 491. Let's now look at the other alternative, which is 482, employer-sponsored visa, and 494, employer regional sponsored visa. Those visas are actually surprisingly much easier than waiting in a queue for a miracle to happen. 482 sponsorship, commonly known sponsorship, requires only 3 things. Have an occupation from the appropriate list, be qualified to perform the job, and have 2 years full-time employment in the last 5 years. No skills assessment required for 482. There's a very small number of occupations. They are very specific, which requires skills assessment, but generally speaking, 99% of occupations do not require skills assessment. Typical example, a student completes a certificate 3 in carpentry in Melbourne, or Bachelor of Engineering in Melbourne. After that, both of those qualifications are eligible for graduate visa 485. That's for two years in duration, in length, plus the wait time, which is very long today, which is great. 2 years employment as a carpenter, as a junior engineer, and as long as you're good at your job, you can get sponsorship, and that leads directly to permanent residency. That pathway has nothing to do with points, nothing to do with how many people are in Victoria and trying to apply for 190, those state-nominated visa, and so on, regional, nothing to do with that. This is a very simple, straightforward pathway. No wonder that this particular visa, 186, has the highest number of allocated permanent visas to Australia, because that's probably the best option for the government. Those people would have to be working 3, 4, 5 years in their occupation before they get residency. Yes, it is a longer time, but you get it. Unlike the other nominated options, there's no guarantee that you'll ever get it. So that's the 482. 494 is a regional sponsorship. How different is that to 482? Well, it's much harder, I have to admit. First of all, you have to have an occupation, that's the same. Secondly, you need to have a qualification to perform the occupation. Number 3, that's already changing. Every 494 employer nominated visa for regional, employer sponsored visa for regional requires skills assessment. That again may be an issue for some courses like the community services we just mentioned. And number 4, you need to have 3 years full-time employment before you can apply for 494 regional sponsored visa. But once you get that, you're sailing towards permanent residency under your own steam, right? You don't need to compete with others. You know, I'm studying here, I've been living in Darwin for 2 years. That's completely irrelevant. So I have been asked by our clients how to explain those two options in a simple way. Well, the sponsorship, the 482 or the 494, imagine you are in Sydney, you bought yourself a car, you fill up the tank, you got water, you got food, and you are driving down to Melbourne. It's about 1,000 kilometers, it's a long drive, it's a whole day. That's your sponsorship. It's your vehicle, and you will eventually get there. The nominated option is you are at the airport, Sydney airport, which is full of people, and you're on a standby on a potential flight. That flight may never come because of the very limited capacity compared to the number of people who are at the departure hall. But if you do get a ticket, you are in Melbourne in an hour and a half. So the nominated option is much faster. if you get it. But given the ratio across the whole country, we're looking approximately 10% success rate. What I tell my clients, get your car, fill up the tank, get the water, food, and embark on a journey towards Melbourne. And at the same time, remotely be on a standby for the ticket. If you get a ticket, abandon the car and fly down. But if you won't get a ticket, you'll get there anyway. So ultimately, the most secure migration pathway is not to move to Adelaide, is not to move to Perth, is to find a sponsor, being good at your job, and have a company that needs you. Whether that's in regional, whether it's in Sydney, depending on the occupation, you'll get there. There are 3 reasons I would send people to regional Australia. Number 1, they have a skills assessment qualification in an occupation which is not available in Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane. Number 2, they are a little bit older people, for example 42, because 491494, you have to apply for this visa before the age of 45, even though it's temporary, right? And then 3 years later you can get 191 permanent, and you may be over the age of 45. Sydney wouldn't work. And the 3rd reason why I would suggest people to go to regional Australia is because they've been offered a job. A carpenter, for example, if he or she is offered a job in Dubbo in regional New South Wales, he can go there, but not because it's regional, but because he has a job. But carpenters don't need to leave Sydney. They don't need to leave Melbourne. They can be anywhere in Australia and have identical migration pathways because of the 482 sponsorship. As long as they're good at their job, they will receive permanent residency through the employer-sponsored stream, subclass 186. That particular pathway with the sponsorships, you have 50% control over the outcome. The other 50% is your employer. And as long as you are good at your job, the employers say it, you turn up on time, your job is he can rely on the outcome, why would he let you go? He will be more than happy to sign that off. I've been working in immigration law for over 20 years. My colleague Marek for over 17 years. We together have decades of experience. We currently employ 2 Spanish-speaking lawyers who are helping us to communicate the real migration pathway to the Latin American community, and we're working with them heavily and intensely. So this is our experience, this is what we do every day with results. We're not giving you a hope, we are realizing your migration pathway.